What's your best true spooky story? Serious. While at uni, my friends and I ran out of booze. Hardly any shops were open because it was late on, so the only option was to walk the mile or so to the nearest 24-hour supermarket. Between the supermarket and the dorms we lived in was just row after row of suburban houses which all looked the same. As we were walking down one road, we passed a field with a large campfire and some people riding horses around it. There were people playing musical instruments, and general sounds of a good time going on. The horses and fire, and the lanterns which were dotted about, gave it a very old-fashioned feel. Maybe 5 minutes after passing the field, now walking past houses again, one of my friends commented on how weird and out of place that gathering of people had been. My other friend and I had been thinking exactly the same thing, so, curious, we turned around and walked back to find out exactly what was going on. There was nothing there, not just no people or horses, there was no field, just more and more houses. Even though we were absolutely certain we were on the right road, as we'd simply turned around, we walked up and down the neighboring roads too. We found nothing. We weren't drunk, though we'd had some drinks, and so I've got absolutely no idea what happened that night. The scariest thing I've had happen while camping. So I live in Eastern Oregon, and my mom lives in Western Oregon. I went to visit her for the summer and she's very outdoorsy, so we decided to take the 1-hour drive from her city to the coast. We end up at this free campsite at the top of this hill, huge foothills of the coastal mountains, about a 25-minute drive from the top where the campsite is to the bottom where the main road was, and we were the only campers there. We relaxed for the rest of the day, made food, etc. A truck full of men drive up the hill and talk with my mom. What about, wasn't suspicious at the time, and they leave us. Fast forward to the middle of the night. I wake up to my mom sitting straight up in the tent. I wake easily, so I heard her gasp and it woke me. As soon as she saw I was awake, she put her hand over my mouth because I was starting to ask her what's wrong. It was dead silent, and all of a sudden you hear footsteps right beside the tent. The little flap that covers the zipper was even moving. Thankfully my mom has quick wits and said very loudly, "Kenny, grab the gun." Kenny is my dad, although that doesn't matter, and mind you, he was not there. Just us girls, like I previously said. They left. No harm was done. Thank the Lord for my mama. 4 years ago, I lived in a very large farmhouse that was converted into 2 apartments. The house was known as the Old Boys' Home. It was used to house boys with behavioral issues but was closed due to allegations of molestation. Anyway, I was living with my boyfriend and 3-year-old daughter at the time. My bedroom had a large fireplace that had been boarded up and painted over. I decided to push my bed up against it one day while I was rearranging things. It was like a headboard. That night, around 1 a.m. I had heard a small voice saying, "Mom, Mom, Mommy." I had sat up in bed but didn't see anything, so I reached over my boyfriend trying to grab my daughter and put her in our bed. I kept feeling around and I was still hearing the voice, but I couldn't feel her. My boyfriend woke up and turned the bedside lamp on, asking me, "What the hell are you doing?" I explained that Amelia was trying to get in our bed and I was reaching for her. There was nobody there. My daughter was sound asleep in her room. Then the next night came. Around 1 a.m. again my dog had started to whimper at outdoor, so my boyfriend got up to take him outside. You know that feeling in a bed when someone lies down next to you? Where the bed pushes in and there is a warmth in your back. I felt that. So I assumed my boyfriend had come back to bed. I rolled over, my boyfriend wasn't in the bed, and I felt the fucking bed release pressure. Whatever was laying next to me has gotten up in that second. I moved my bed the next day to the other side of the room, and I never had another incident in the 2 years I remained in that house. When my grandparents bought their house for a family of 10, my grandpa found a fake wall upstairs. He tore it down to make more room for the family. Behind the wall were children's clothes and play toys, almost like they walked off the room in a hurry. My mom told me stories of sitting in her room and something circling the walls around her, sounding like wallpaper being torn. When she moved out, my aunt moved into the same room. She would wake up with pictures she hung up laying on her chest in the morning. My cousins also have stories of hearing footsteps coming up the stairs and stopping outside their door in the middle of the night. I still don't go upstairs at their house because it's always cold and I get weird vibes up there. Even in my adult life I have scary dreams that take place in their upstairs. Alt account, because this is still a story that I don't want associated with my main account. It's not as spooky as some other stories on here I guess, but my so and I are still a bit bewildered by it. It's been years and we still wonder about it occasionally. There's no explanation other than some weird supernatural connection or just a really big coincidence. For about 10 years now, my Nana has been living in a nursing home. She had a stroke and mentally she is not all there. She still recognizes us when we visit and gets happy to see us, but she often talks gibberish, thinking she is in a distant memory in the past. It makes me sad because she and I always had a very close connection growing up. My parents both worked a lot and she would stay with me. She used to know when I was lying, she could always sense when I was sick, even when she wasn't over, and she and I are eerily similar both in personality and looks. There are pictures of her when she was 21 and it could be me in the picture. We were very close growing up and I love her dearly. I introduced her to my now husband when we started dating in college. He is from a different country than I am and I live in his country, so we had been dating a few years when my visa was going to expire. In order for us to live in one place, we decided to get married. However, we were still young, fresh out of university and decided to just elope. We decided to get officially married at a courthouse while announcing our engagement and then having a wedding a few years later. Official documents and wedding ceremonies are separated in my husband's country anyways. No one knew of our plan. We were, and are still, stupidly in love and thrilled to have such a crazy secret between us two. In hindsight, it was stupid and no one would have judged us, especially considering we are still happily together years later, but we still decided to hide it because we were stupid kids. So we flew to visit my parents in my home country and announce our engagement and my dad picked us up from the airport. We were chatting in the car, when he tells us that my Nana was freaking out while he visited her the other day. The day we decided to elope. Why was she freaking out? She announced to my whole family that she saw in her dreams that I had eloped and was now married. They dismissed her because they didn't expect that at all. She kept insisting and was incredibly lucid about it. She raised her voice, which she hadn't done since before the stroke. My dad had mentioned because he thought it was sweet that she was so worried about this and became so lucid. My husband and I just got silent in the car and I went cold. We don't know how she knew that or if it was just coincidence. But she knew somehow. We went to visit her a few days later and she didn't remember it at all. She was thrilled we were engaged. We are happily married now and had our wedding and stuff, and no one ever found out we had eloped before the wedding day, except my Nana apparently. I posted this in a thread a while ago but gonna do it again because it applies here. When I was in high school my uncle would throw me a couple bucks to help babysit his kids with my aunt. They lived in a 2-story house by the water, nice area. The kids were about 3 and 6. One day I was sitting in their den on my phone when I started to hear a baby crying. Thinking it was the 3-year-old, I headed to the bottom of the stairs to check and see if my aunt was up there dealing with it. I called for her a couple times with no response. The baby kept crying. I called for her one more time, and when I got no response I started walking up the stairs. Then I heard my cousins and aunt playing outside. All the hairs on my body stood up and I literally felt a chill run down my spine. I quietly turned around, walked down the stairs, got in my car and drove away. The baby was still crying when I closed the door behind me. A few years later I was drunk at a family party and told my uncle the story. He told me that he and his wife used to hear the baby too, and apparently the previous owners had a kid die of SIDS in that room upstairs. He's uber Catholic and had a mass said for the baby. He said after that it never happened again. Still gives me the willies when I talk about it though. Posted this in another thread but seems appropriate here. Edited slightly to fit thread. I have had several dreams similar to what I am posting. I've been a caver in Florida for about 13 years, since I was about 6, and have been to a lot of caves. Never been afraid before this to go in one. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I started having this reoccurring dream. I would have it at least twice a year, always the same even though I would realize I was dreaming after the first few iterations. I would fall asleep and dream of being in a cave and going into this little hole in the bottom. Inside I would see a 10 to 15 foot long corridor about 2 to 4 feet high. At the end it would always turn left, and I always saw a bent red stop sign at the end, like someone ripped off the top 2 feet and tossed it in. But I would always follow the corridor. I would turn and walk past the sign despite being scared, despite many times knowing what was there, and the corridor would start descending, quickly opening up into a large vertical chamber with a path leading down in a corkscrew. Everything became blurry at this point, but it was always the same. I saw trash scattered on the walls. I saw the pit leading down to a curved floor. I saw things, undefined. Animals or people or something else at the bottom. And I saw my family, each with one of the things, being tortured and killed. Every time. And I could never do anything. After I saw that, I would be stuck for a few seconds until I felt more than saw everything turn and look at me. And I would wake up. Not like a normal dream where you just drift to consciousness or a nightmare where you bolt up in fear, but like something pushed me out. Like I wasn't supposed to be there. So I have this dream multiple times a year until I turned 15. I did tell a friend about the dream before. What happens next? My father decided to take us to some caves we never had been before. One of which was Dog Drop. It was likely named so because someone either threw their pet in there or a coyote fell in and the body was later discovered. Dog Drop had a roughly 30-foot rappel straight down to enter. I went down with my brother while my father waited up at the top. There was a hole in the ground. I started to feel uneasy though I didn't know why. So I followed my brother into the hole. I felt worse as I moved down, and when I looked up I saw the same corridor, the same turn, the same wall, the same bottles at the corner. And I instantly was hit with this overwhelming sense of nausea and fear and being watched, and everything was screaming at me to leave. I froze and must have made some noise because my brother turned around and asked what was wrong. I managed to say I wanted to leave now and climbed out as quickly as I could, followed immediately by my brother. We packed up and left, never have gone back and never will. Haven't told anyone what actually happened, just said I wasn't feeling well, and they forgot pretty quickly. The thing that really makes it creepy for me is I have never had the dream again. Year after year I would have it consistently, but it just stopped after that. But I still remember it all, and I still feel afraid, almost an external fear, when I think of it. Previous edit for safety. I saw some people talking about looking up the cave/visiting. Just want to say, never go caving, especially in an unfamiliar place, without a guide who belongs to a local group. If you belong to another group but have never been in the area, it's best to talk to a local one before leaving. Caving is dangerous and people die. Don't be arrogant and try and rappel on a garden hose. Yes, someone did that. Yes, they died. The local grotto you can check out is called the Tampa Bay Area Grotto, and yes, the initials Art Bag. At the time I was around 14, I'd asked my dad to wake me up early that morning at about 5 a.m. because I had some work to get done. That morning, I was woken up, and I flung my legs over the side of my bed. I felt a tug on both of them. What I thought at the time was just my dad trying to get me to hurry up. I reached over to pick up my phone and turned it on, 3:30 a.m., and I looked over at the black figure I assumed was my dad, and it was gone. Back when I was a kid, my grandmother had a really close friend who used to help her babysit us. One day she goes missing. Family doesn't know where she is and we don't either. About a week later police find her body in a dumpster. She had been dead for 4 to 5 days. She had been mugged and had several stab wounds. Incredibly tragic. Who would mug an old lady? Here's the spooky story. A few days just before she was found, my 3 cousins swore they saw her walking around in their backyard and knocking on their window. The following day had search going through the area. It wasn't until the body was found that we realized what they saw couldn't be true according to police timeline, but they swore it was her. Edit: I'm adding more context for the story. I initially kept it brief because I didn't want to have a wall of text, but since this blew up a bit, I'll include more details. The backyard was actually pretty big and long because it was shared by the entire apartment complex, which had 4 units, 2 upstairs, 2 down. My cousins were in the downstairs unit on the left. Again, like I said in a different post, it was gated on all sides by wooden fencing. My cousin's window had blind spots so you couldn't see the entire backyard. It wasn't nighttime, but the sun was setting. They said it was almost down at this point, so I assume around 7 p.m. They're in their room, which has a window that sees into the backyard. It was ghetto and they were pretty poor, so their beds only had the mattress, not the frame supporting it. It was a queen and a single pressed up against the wall with a window. So basically, to look into the backyard, you were standing up on a mattress looking against how you normally face, back against the wall, sitting down on the mattress. Youngest brother, there's someone in the back. She just walked away. Oldest, laying down on the bed. WTF are you talking about? Youngest, dude. It looks like old lady, she's walking around where grandma's vegetable garden is. Oldest, youngest, come look. She's just walked away. Oldest, goes and looks, I don't see anything. Stop being stupid, goes back to laying down, little one stands there looking at him, middle brother comes to look a moment later, oh shit. She's right there, WTF she's coming to us. They all look to see the lady knocking on the window. They scream, panic and run out to Dad. Dad obviously doesn't believe them, but after a bit gives in. He goes out and checks, nothing. So just a side note, the way these apartments were connected, you couldn't go into the backyard from your individual unit. You had to get out into the main hall, which had a door that opened into the backyard. I went to use the bathroom at work and when I entered, there was no one in there. The bathroom has 4 urinals and 4 stalls, 1 handicap, and I did not see any feet in any of the stalls. I took up my normal spot inside one stall and was doing my business, when I heard the sound of someone peeing into one of the urinals. But no one had entered the bathroom. The door is heavy and loud when it closes, so I would have heard someone entering. After a normal amount of time, the peeing stopped, and I heard a few footsteps. But the door never opened. When I finished up I did a cursory look and there was no one in the bathroom. It's a ridiculous story, but I definitely heard a pee ghost. I lived in an old apartment in 2002. The place was built in 1900, so it was just over 100 years old when I moved in. The living room and kitchen were fine, but the bathroom and bedroom were unnerving, like I just always felt like I was being watched, especially in the bedroom if the closet door was open. Those unnerving feelings just became moderately uncomfortable as I settled in. I felt safe in the bedroom, but only if the door was locked. One night I was dead asleep when there was a loud bang on my bedroom door. When I got up the courage to get out of bed, I checked the apartment and all the windows were closed and locked from the inside. The door still had the chain secured. No one was in there. I mentioned the closet in the bedroom. I never liked going in there, and I never liked if the door was open. For some reason, in my head I would hear gasping noises. So for that reason, the closet stayed closed. A month or more after I was woken to the bang on my door, I was dead asleep. But something woke me up, and it was a pressure on me like being held down. It was pitch black in my room. I couldn't see anything, but I knew some was standing over me. When I could finally turn on a bedside lamp, no one was there. After then I couldn't sleep in the dark. I had to sleep with a lamp on. That incident scared the life out of me. And after that the unnerving feeling of being watched intensified. Friends would come over, and comment about being uncomfortable in the bathroom like being watched. It became so uncomfortable for me. When I had the chance to move to another unit, I jumped at it. I packed up and got out. After me, several people rented the apartment, and they would move out within months. I became friendly with the building manager, and I told him that I felt the place was haunted. He kind of laughed it off. Years after, they were renovating the place. Building manager was doing some painting in there. The building owner was there too. I went and checked out the apartment, and it looked nicer. It didn't feel as creepy. I got to talking with the building owner, and through the course of conversation he just throws it out there that a former tenant committed suicide in the closet by hanging themselves. He also mentioned that the original designer of the building lived in that apartment, and died in there. I wasn't mad when I heard that, but felt validated that what I experienced was real. I currently live in a haunted house. I've heard voices, footsteps, lights have been turned on/off. One of the ghosts has a thing for silverware. I hear it clattering in the drawer all the time, and sometimes a knife or two will end up in the wrong slot in the drawer. But the strangest/scariest experience I had was the first night I spent in the house. I wasn't finished moving in, there were boxes everywhere. I didn't even have my mattress up there yet. I was bedding on an old futon mattress, watching a video on my phone, when I get the pins and needles feeling of my feet falling asleep, except it wasn't on my feet, it was on the top of my head in the shape of a hand. I said, "Good night," turned off my light and tried to sleep. When I woke up my closet door was ajar, but other than that everything was otherwise untouched. I guess whoever my unseen roommate is, just wanted to check out who I was on my first night. I had just finished my initial military training, Basic, 8, a few other classes, and got sent to my first duty station. My unit was at NTC for redeployment training, so I met up with the rear echelon. I get issued my room and spent 3 very disturbed days/nights in the barracks with weird stuff happening, like gear not where I left it, locked drawers being opened, the microwave turning on by itself. Shit like that. My roommate, who I knew throughout training, showed up on the 4th day and I told him something along the lines of, "Watch your shit." Someone's been messing with my stuff and I don't know who. So the fourth night comes around and myself and my roommate secure our room and gear and go to bed. Gotta be up at 0530 for PT, so it's an early night. We lock all our stuff and go to bed. I woke up around 0100 cause my blanket had fallen to the ground and I was cold, which was weird cause we were in the south in summer so it's always hot. I hop down to get my blanket and I notice my armoire is open, so I open the lock, close it, lock it, and get back to bed. I fell back asleep pretty easy, but I woke up again at about 0230 and all my stuff and my roommate's stuff is thrown around the room. I wake up my roommate and he's pissed cause someone is messing with us and can't figure out who it is. We clean it up, lock our stuff and go back to bed. I woke up a third time at 0337 and we're not alone. I can hear my roommate snoring, so I know it's not him. I sat up and saw someone in the little kitchenette area with the fridge open looking in it. I was freezing again. I was about to say something as the soldier turned around. My eyes had a moment to adjust to the bright light and then I started recognizing gear like the L-shaped flashlight on his shoulder, his Alice pack with magazine holders and canteens, boots and fatigues. This dude was combat ready. As my eyes reached his face he turned a bit and I could see it. Half his head and helmet were gone. Blown off by the looks of it. I'm scared shitless at this point. He closed the fridge, walked across the room keeping his bright green eyes on, opened my front door and walked out. As he exited he turned back around and said to me, "Be safe." I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I didn't wake my roommate up. I just sat up in bed for about 2 hours till I had to get ready for PT. 0630 rolls around, so everyone is outside the barracks in formation getting ready to start PT and the acting first sergeant says, "Hey, Notches, you good? Looks like you say and a ghost." I replied with, "Negative, I'm fine, 1SG good to go." About halfway through PT he comes up to me and asks me what's wrong because I'm visibly shaken up. I told him I was fine, just couldn't sleep last night. A few others asked if I was okay and I just lied and said I was fine. I really wasn't and they could see that, but they let me be. After PT ended, the acting 1SG pulled me to the side and told me to speak freely, openly, and with all confidentiality and off the record. What is wrong? I told him that if I told him what happened he would think I'm batch T crazy. He assured me it was off record and once again said, "Talk to me, you seriously look like you've seen a ghost." That got an awkward chuckle out of me and I began to tell him my story, and when I got to the part about his head the acting 1SG lost his shit. "Who put you up to this? This is not funny, etc. etc." He smoked me for about 30 minutes, made me do push-ups, mountain climbers, stuff like that, all while yelling at me that I'm a piece of shit. Finally, after about 30 minutes of that, he says, "Look at me in the eye and swear on everything that you love that you're not lying to me." I told him I was not lying. It happened. So he says, "Follow me," so I do. We get to the command office, which I had never been in, and they were obviously locked. He takes me behind 3 locked doors and 3 rooms I had never stepped foot in, and when he opened the last door I saw it. It gave me chills. It still gives me chills, but plain as day there's the soldier's portrait behind the commander's desk. I froze and said, "That's him." Acting 1SG, the guy who assigned me that room, told me who it was. He was a corporal in the unit on my unit's first deployment to Iraq, and he died in a night attack that took off part of his head. I was the first soldier to be assigned that room since it belonged to the deceased corporal. He forgave me and I forgave him, and he told me some stories about who this guy was. I deployed with the unit just a couple months later and spent 12 months fighting in that shithole. I nearly died I don't know how many times. My vehicle got hit with IEDs and rockets, and it always made me think of that corporal. I survived more things than most people can imagine. I always felt like that corporal was keeping an eye out for me. Not everyone in my unit was as lucky as me. 3 from my company didn't get to come home. Mine is a bit different. Me and friend of mine live in rural Ireland. We were going for a walk in the grounds behind a castle. As we were coming to the end of our walk, it was pretty dark and we glanced into an area that has a well, and something caught our eyes. He stayed a bit further back, walked over and looked into the well, only to see 2 yellow eyes looking up at me and a sinister looking grin from a girl with dark hair. Naturally we ran like little girls. We were followed by this little girl all night. We went to graveyard and found her watching us while she sat on a tree. We went under a bridge a few miles outside of the village and she was standing at the other end of the bridge, and slowly started walking toward us. We both saw her every single time. Explanation is easy, we dropped a shitload of LSD and were hallucinating. Just fascinating that we both saw the exact same thing. I never told him what I saw in the well until he told me what he had seen. It matched. I tell this story a lot and no one ever believes me, but I know what I saw. I was staying at my grandparents' for the summer when I was 14. It was 11 p.m. and I was thirsty. Go out to the kitchen and see who I thought was my granddad sitting at the table eating a sandwich. I say hello, grab a glass of water and head back to my room. My grandfather comes out of his room and asks who I was talking to. I turn around and no one was there. It freaked me out, still does to this day. I lived next to a facility for developmentally handicapped people for 3 years. Every day I would jog past this historical marker on their property. One day I decided to take a break. I love history, so I finally walked over and read it. It was a dedication to a mass grave of 300 people for what used to be the grounds for a hospital for the insane. I nearly shat my tracksuit. I have a bunch, but I think the best one I have actually happened to my mom. We lived in a very creepy, very old house when I was little. One day my mom was cleaning my little brother's room while we were at school, and every single one of his electronic toys turned on all at once. 2 of them did not have batteries in them. She was so freaked out she had us camp out in the living room for 3 days cause she didn't want my brother alone in his room. Up until we moved, that would occasionally happen. Either 1 or 2 toys at a time. Freshman year at my university. We had a creepy, old dorm on campus that no one was living in. Everyone generally avoided it because it just had an uncomfortable feeling when you got close to it and felt like you were being watched. There are rumored stories about it of 2 women dying there on separate occasions, 1 murder, 1 suicide, and they're the ones who haunt the building. One night, a friend was in a bad mood because his girlfriend had broken up with him, so I was walking around campus with him to let him get it off his chest and just trying to help him feel better. We walked past the dorm and I brought it up about it being haunted and was telling him the stories to try and take his mind off it. So, the way the bottom floor was set up, there were 2 doors on both sides of the building and the hallway ran the entire length of the building and you could see the other door. We walked up to one of the windows and were just looking down the hall when 2 girls walked out of a room, wearing clothes that looked like they were from the 70s/80s and stood there in the hall looking at each other, not speaking. Then, one girl slowly turned her head and looked straight at us, slowly turned her head back, then turned and walked the opposite way from us down the hall. So we ran to the other side of the building, but we couldn't find them. We came back to the original door, and watched them do the same thing all over again. We looked at each other and ran. This freaked me out for a while, especially after, when I was sleeping in my room and all my posters fell off the wall at the same time. After telling this story to another friend, he convinced me to go back with him and try to find a way in. We found an open window, which we later found out was the room the girl hung herself in, and climbed in and started walking down the hall. We wandered around the building a bit and just started to notice generally creepy things. Water faucets started coming on, we'd walk through one room and then back through and a chair would be moved. On the first floor, a desk was turned upside down under the stairwell. As we were getting close to leaving, a lot more water faucets came on and kept getting louder and louder. Then when we got back to the room to go back out of the window, and as we put our hands on the window, the door slammed closed, so we ripped the door open, dove out and ran back to our dorm. And never went back. I'm sure this will get buried, but I've got one. It's more bittersweet spooky than spooky, but here goes. My ex had this lamp that she had on the island in our kitchen. She turned it on pretty much every night, and in the mornings to make coffee it was a pretty solid little lamp. I brought my cat to live with us late in our relationship because she had dogs and my cat was pretty up there in age and not used to dogs, so I tried to spare her little heart from that shock. She came to love laying down in the spot by where that lamp plugged into an outlet on the wall of the island. She died soon after I brought her over, and I was absolutely heartbroken. I had a hard time accepting the loss. About a week after my cat died, my ex was grinding coffee in a little electric grinder and I heard her shriek from the other room. I rushed over to see what was going on, and she told me she felt something cold pass by her feet. Then the light on the lamp started flickering. She tried to show me again the flickering, but it didn't happen. I just chalked it up to her being weird at 6 a.m. A couple of days later, she asked me to make coffee for her. I grabbed the grinder, flick on the lamp to see what I was doing, and sure enough the same thing happened to me. A cold wind whipped past me like a cat running around my feet. Then the light on the lamp flickered before I could even get the grinder going. It never happened before or after, despite the hundreds of times I'd used the grinder in the same outlet as the lamp. I like to think it was my little girl saying goodbye one last time. One time I wanted a Coke, and when I went into the kitchen there was, ISHTU not, a knife balancing on its tip, next to a full can of Coke. When I was home alone, yes, I drank the soda. To the skeptics who say I'm lying, this happened. If you don't believe, give me a rational explanation as to how a soda can get from a refrigerator to the kitchen counter, along with a knife standing on its tip, which might be impossible. Provide me with a rational explanation as to how that happened in a locked house. My wife and I were having a great weekend in Las Vegas when my father-in-law passed away in the early morning hours. We get the call and haul ass to get back to the rest of the family. After a couple of hours the family is all together and talking, sharing memories when we arrive. Shortly after we arrive it gets brought up, how are we going to share this news with our niece, who was in prison at the time. While trying to figure it out, a call comes from out of nowhere. It's our niece and she asks what happened to Grandpa. She had a dream that he visited her and said goodbye. She freaks and calls us weird. About 2 months after my father passed, my mom and all of my brothers and sisters were sitting around the dining room table. We were just talking about the past and sharing stories. We were talking about my father and suddenly the globe around the light on the ceiling fell straight down on the center of the table. It didn't break or roll or move at all after hitting the table. Scared the SHD out of all of us. I came home from work one day to grab my spare tires. My sister was away at school 7 hours away and neither of my parents were going to be home for another 5 hours at minimum. I ran in, changed my clothes, grabbed my tires, then drove to a garage to get them installed. I got home 2 hours later and as I walked into the living room, there was a chair just sitting in the middle of the hallway and was facing the front door. I thought nothing of it but didn't recognize the chair as being one that we owned. It was a standard metal folding chair that you would buy for a couple bucks at a retail store. I folded it up and propped it up against my dad's workbench in our garage. My mom gets home a couple hours later and I ask her in passing why she left a metal chair in the middle of the hallway. She tells me we don't own any metal chairs and that she hadn't been home up until an hour ago. I told her I came home and there was a metal chair just sitting in the middle of the hallway after I had gotten back from the garage. She told me to show her the chair and when I went out to the garage to show it to her, it was gone. I looked high and low for that metal chair but couldn't find it. I swore to her that I wasn't on drugs and that I wasn't imagining things. She thought what I was telling her was strange but didn't pay much attention to it. I never saw that chair again, nor do I know where it came from or where it went. I've posted in the past a story about some weird thing I saw in the woods at my grandparents' house, DL Drive. Silhouette of a deer against the curtains suddenly changed into a man's silhouette. Usual suggestions are skinwalker or Wendigo. The one I liked was maybe it was just Pan joking around, but I am gonna post about another instance of weird shit. This was at the house we lived in for about 7 years. Many strange things happened in that house. You could hear voices murmuring from time to time. I saw a shadow person, saw someone stick their head into the room once. None of it felt hostile, but the same couldn't be said for this pervasive feeling my mother and I both felt if we went out front at night. She and I both felt like there was something watching and it wasn't friendly. On this particular night, it was about midnight or so and I felt like driving to the 24/7 grocery store since I wanted some snacks. As I stepped out the front door, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, and turned to look. There was this very tall thing just floating, for lack of a better term. I'd almost describe it as hanging, but there was nothing holding it up, outside of my brother's window. It was seemingly covered in a sheet that had once been white, but was extremely dirty, so it was more off-white, and got brown with mud and dirt the further down it went. There were no visible feet, nor eyes or face, but I could tell it was staring at my brother's window. As I stared at it, it turned to look at me and I remember feeling like one of those butterfly specimens, pinned to a board. It was as though its stare was physically holding me in place. It felt like an eternity, but only a second or two passed, and it looked back at the window, the pressure lifting, and then vanished. Right as it vanished, there was a fluttering of wings in the tree above, and one of our neighborhood's owls came to perch there. In a way it felt like the owl came to my defense, as silly as that may sound. Our cul-de-sac loved the pair of owls. They were more like neighbors to us, so maybe it was just protective of a fellow neighbor. That's how I like to think of it. Anyway, in any event, I decided that it might be best to just make some popcorn or something that night instead. Come to think of it, I don't think I ever told my brother about the thing. I probably should. When I was about 12 I was at my cousin's house, he was about 9, messing around on their trampoline. This was an older neighborhood, kind of dilapidated. My cousin and I get the bright idea to sneak into the old abandoned house on the other side of his fence, so we climb the fence, walk the narrow path between his fence and the side of the old house, we were barefoot, WTF, and go around to the front of the house. The front door was actually modern, a steel door with a lock on it. We tried it, and it opened. We went inside and the smell hit us like a wall. This sweet, sickly smell filled the whole house, so we held our noses as we walked through. There was no glass on the floor, which was fortunate for our aforementioned bare feet, but there was a lot of dust. It was a shotgun house with maybe 4 small rooms that we could tell, and in the front room there were like 6 or 7 mountain bikes. We figured someone was just storing things here. The bathroom was off this room, and it had a bunch of small, old glass bottles that looked like they dated back to the 1940s or thereabouts. The second room, past the first, had a bunch of old junk in it, but the thing that sticks out in my mind was an old cassette player with a cassette still in it. On the label the cassette said Deborah, March 18, 1993. We didn't really care about this. The third room had more bikes and more junk, and it had a tiny closet off to the side. We wrestled the cobwebs away and saw nothing other than a chainsaw with red-brown residue on it. Alarm bells were going off in our heads now, and even though we tried to rationalize it as just trust, we decided to quickly see what was in the fourth room and then GTFO. We walked into the fourth room and saw that it was completely empty, except for some stairs to the basement, lots of dust, and a small wooden cross. Painted on it were these words, Deborah September 29, 1963, March 18, 1993. Then we heard a thump from the basement, then we ran. We ran out the front door, down the path, climbed the fence, through my cousin's backyard, into his house, up the stairs, into his room and under the bed. We stayed there for hours, whispering and speculating and vowing never to go back there again. But we did. And that's another story for another day. You might think this is fictional, and I kinda worded it that way. But I can't make this up. Okay guys, part 2 is in the comments. Update: I actually went back to the house yesterday and it's been torn down. Disappointing but also kind of a relief. My high school used to be a giant mansion before it was converted into an orphanage and then a high school. One section of the school, the third floor, was inaccessible. The staircase which led to the floor was blocked off with wood and painted black to match the chorus room where it was located. In 2003, during the fall school show of Les Mis, they had to remove the wood so they could replace the windows on that third floor. We even ended up using some of the removed windows for our barricade. We had play practice most nights and, if you lived far enough away, usually you would just stay at the school and wait rather than go home just to come right back up. While waiting for practice to start one night, myself and 3 friends Ryan, Mike, and Michelle, decided to go up the staircase to check out the third floor. The staircase was rotted and falling apart from years of disuse, so we carefully went up one at a time to find an unremarkable hallway with some even less remarkable rooms off to the sides. All of this led into a big open area with old, stacked desks and folders full of test papers from like the 80s or something. The 4 of us were a bit disappointed because the rumor was that this section of the school was not converted from the orphanage that occupied the space several decades earlier, and the ghosts of orphans still haunted the place. Since we didn't get spooked, we ended up just digging through the old papers. While Michelle was looking through the papers in a side room with her back to us, Ryan pushed Mike and myself out of the room quietly and into an adjacent room to scare Michelle into thinking we disappeared. Sure enough, she comes bolting out of the room screaming at us, throwing out "This isn't funny." We had to muffle our mouths to keep from laughing, when, all of a sudden, one of the people in the room fucking ruined the whole thing by giggling like a little girl. I turned to Ryan and Mike to see which one of them ruined the joke, but both of their hands were over their mouths and their eyes were wide as dinner plates. This room we were in, hiding behind the door, was small, maybe the size of a small, one-stall bathroom. Maybe that's what it was once upon a time, and somebody in this tiny room was giggling and it was none of us. This whole plot played out in probably like 10 seconds between leaving Michelle and hearing the giggle. So we stood there staring at each other waiting for something to happen that explained this. It was like 4 or 5 p.m. and we were the only ones in the chorus classroom the entire day. We would have seen someone go upstairs. We would have heard the stairs creaking as they went up there. Whoever giggled at us from inside that room was up there already. Unfortunately, we didn't get the explanation we needed because a second set of giggles started happening, this time more than one person making them. That was it for Ryan, a big, tough former athlete turned show kid, who screamed the highest pitch scream I've ever seen a guy that size make. It would have been funny if we weren't terrified. He pushed past us, ran screaming out into the hallway, scared the daylights out of Michelle on his way down, and we bolted down the steps. This time, we did not take them one by one and actual chunks of rotten wood started falling off. We explained what happened to Michelle and then went somewhere that was not the Chris classroom until play practice started. The maintenance team must have known we were up because we all collectively got a talking to about going up there. Safety concerns with the rotted steps. So of course, people started going up there willy-nilly hoping to see a ghost. There are more stories about the third floor during that year that promptly stopped once they replaced the windows and sealed the room back up. Now the school is closed and empty, so whatever ghosts were having a good time are now free to do so without the living getting in the way. This just happened to me 2 days ago. I was walking into the house after work around 6 p.m. so it was already mostly dark, and suddenly the entire sky lit up bright green, and there was a super loud zap sound just like a movie laser or something, right over my head, so loud that I hit the deck and then tore ass back into the house. One of my roommates was cooking dinner and I was like, "What, did you see that?" But he didn't. We went back outside, no transformers near or out, no house's electricity out, no sign of disturbance at all. Now I'm a rational grown man, a believer in science and always that there must be a rational explanation for the sky, but this was truly a mind blow and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. About 5 years and 2 boyfriends ago, I moved into an old farmhouse with my then significant other. He was a hoarder and was embarrassed about the state his house was in after his wife left him. He had an RV and that's where he slept, because there was just shit, garbage, clothes, boxes up to your knees in every room of the house. Me, being extremely distressed by clutter, cleaned that house, down to cobwebby corners of the ceiling. It took me weeks, but Murphy's oiled every inch of wood, filled his truck with over 10 loads of garbage. The very first night I was there, things were weird. At that point I had only cleared part of the living room. The boyfriend snored unbearably loud, so I opted to sleep inside, on the couch, while he slept out in his camper. I had just had a fight with my mother and was lying awake around 4 a.m. fuming about it. I heard my boyfriend come in the back door, muttering to himself as usual. He was opening and closing drawers and cabinets in the kitchen, figured he was searching for something. Finally I got up because hell, I was already awake, maybe I could help him find whatever it was. The kitchen was 5 feet from where I was and when I walked in, there was no one there. I looked around and called for him but he wasn't there. I don't get scared easily and at this point I was just curious about where he was. I went out the camper and could hear him snoring hard before I even got to the door. I shook him awake and asked him gently what he had needed in the house. He said he hadn't left the camper all night. I thought, he was sleepwalking. When I went back inside, though, I noticed it had snowed lightly in the night and the only tracks leading up to the camper were mine. Couple days later, I moved my 2 cats in. They are super on edge, a lot of growling, acting out of character, especially in the middle of the night. I completely dismissed it as it was a new, unfamiliar place. Obviously they were uncomfortable. I had finally gotten the bedroom habitable and they would not cross the threshold into it. The first night we slept in the bedroom was when I started to fear the house. The bed was up against a window that faced out to the cornfield and my guy insisted on sleeping on the outside of the bed, leaving me pressed against the window. I got this horrible feeling. Something was right outside the window and I was frantic to the point of tears. I kept telling him there was something out there and he said I was being dramatic, which was stupid, because I'm just not. You spend your whole life being logical and calm and when something weird happens, no one believes you. I slept on the couch. The next day, I noticed a handprint on the top of the bedroom window that I had just cleaned the day prior. I held my hand up to it and it was thrice the size of my own hand, bigger than any person's handprint I've ever seen. It wasn't just a print, though, it was elongated, as if the hand had dragged down the window. Still could be an explanation, even though I had cleaned the window the day before and would have noticed, except the print was over 9 feet off the ground directly over an open coal cellar. I showed my boyfriend and he told me something surprising. His ex-wife thought there was something wrong with the house too. She was making dinner one day and he had gotten home from work, her back was turned to him and they had a full conversation. Then she looked out the kitchen window and saw him pull up in his truck. He still blew it off with me, just telling me I was paranoid and such. All this time, I assumed he was right, dismissed my instincts and went about things normally. Then one morning in the spring I got up to use the bathroom. It was 4:46 in the morning and I knew the time because I checked my phone when I got up. The whole bedroom was light from the sunrise and I quietly climbed back into bed. The house is all wood paneling and because of my arachnophobia I had the bed scooted about 5 inches away from the wall where our heads were. I laid down and tucked my arm up onto the pillow with my hand over the edge. The second I closed my eyes, an icy cold hand grabbed me by the wrist and yanked down hard. I bolted up and in a state of complete terror shook my boyfriend awake and asked if he was messing with me. He wasn't. I will never forget that grip because I had to struggle to get my hand back. I called my close friend and she said, "You know that there's a cemetery within view of your bedroom, right?" I had forgotten, but being a practical person, it had never occurred to me that there might be a connection. She said, "Let's try something," came over with a sagebrush and we smudged the house. We were both laughing at ourselves as we did it, but the thing is, nothing weird happened after that. Well, except me falling into a hole in the floor. But I blame that on my own clumsiness. The relationship withered, I moved out, but we remain friends. He says nothing strange has happened since I left. I've posted this before, but it's a great one. I have a tale. This is my parents' story, but it is so good the internet needs it. Sorry for the extreme length. This is like a 2-hour story when my parents tell it. They remember it even more vividly than I could type about it. This is 100% real. If you think otherwise, bugger off. Part 1, Mekwan. Back in the 80s, my parents had just gotten married, graduated from college, and had my big brother. They moved into a small house in a very affluent neighborhood north of Milwaukee. The house was surprisingly in their budget, again, just graduated from college and med school with a little one, but was the smallest on the block. My parents made an offer that was a few under the asking price. 2 other couples offered more than the asking, bidding more. However, the old man that owned the house rejected both of those offers and said he wanted my folks to have it. He said he and his late wife would have both agreed it was the right thing to do. My folks are super grateful and are extremely excited to be living in the neighborhood. There are many youngsters, so my brother had lots of playtime. Life was very good. Then, shit starts going down. Part 2, Red Light. The first thing was with the basement. So, during this time my mom stayed at home with my brother and my dad was getting his practice started. He worked super late and was only home on Sundays basically. My mom did laundry in the basement and one day when she was walking upstairs, a red light at the bottom of the stairs turned on. Now I am told this is a super bright light, and the switch for it was taken out long ago. It is almost like a fallout shelter emergency light with a cage on it. My mom didn't know what to think, so she starts going downstairs to investigate. The light turns off. She figures that maybe it was some sort of surge. The next day, she goes downstairs again. Comes up. The light is on again. Again starts walking down and it turns off. She does not shrug it off this time. She waits a bit at the bottom of the stairs and then walks back upstairs. The light turns on and she runs down this time to catch it, only this time it starts flashing like a strobe light before she can even reach the bottom. She noped out the house so quickly with my brother and didn't go back the rest of the day. The light never turned on for my dad or turned on again after that day. Part 3, Knock Knock. After the red light thing my mom is naturally shook up. She is scared to go downstairs without my dad, rightfully so. But there was something that started before the red light but escalated after. Knocking. My parents figured this was originally just natural sounds of the house as it was fairly old. It would be very sporadic and very infrequent, until one night. My parents were in bed chatting about the day, bills, etc. etc. Then they started hearing knocking. It started in their room onto the bed, then on the walls and ceiling. It would be about 30 seconds apart and they could not find a source. Then it sounded like the knocking was outside their room, so they got up and tried following the sound and find where it was. They went all over the house trying to figure out where it came from. Every time they thought they found the source, it would jump to a different side of the room. They eventually were in the foyer/living room and tracked the knocking super frequently and super loud to the foyer closet. My mom had a fireplace poker in hand, and my dad a bat. He crept towards the closet, and as he reached for the doorknobs, a voice calls out to them, "Knock knock." He swung the doors open. There was nothing there, and all the knocking stopped. My parents could do nothing but stare at each other. Neither of them slept that night. Part 4, It pushed me. After the red light and knock knock, my parents are wary of this house. My mom is on the verge of a breakdown and not dealing with this well at all. Remember, she is in this house all day with this nonsense. My dad is usually more skeptical towards this kind of stuff, but he knows something is very wrong and thinks my mom is totally justified in her feelings. Well, we fast forward a few weeks, maybe even a month. It is a normal night like any other. My parents are asleep in their room, my brother in his. In the middle of the night, my mom suspects 2 to 3 a.m. can't be certain, being all drowsy. My parents wake up to a huge thud. Immediately my parents jump up and hear my brother is awake calling for them. They rush into his room and he is laying down in the very center of the room on the floor with his blanket perfectly taut and draped on him. As though he was tucked into bed, but on the ground at least 5 feet from his bed. My parents pick him up and ask him what happened. He responds pointing to the closet, "It pushed me, the fox pushed me." My dad opens the closet, rifles through everything looking for an animal, and of course finds nothing. So this is weird, right? Why would a 3-year-old say such a thing? Well, in this moment, my parents remembered the last name of the old man that sold them the house. Fox. Part 5, Reconciliation. ISHTU not. My parents freaked out on this. There were too many things going on. My mom refused to let herself and my brother stay in the house, especially since she was now pregnant with my sister. My dad decided he was going to take care of this. Again, he is not a superstitious man. He is a doctor and a man of logic. However, he knew there was something going on with this house. A night or two after the fox incident, my dad sat down in the living room and had a talk with the spirit of the house. He said this, "I don't know if you are real. I do not know if you are Mrs. Fox, but I do know this, you are going to stop. We are a peaceful and loving family. If you are Mrs. Fox, your husband would be ashamed of you. He wanted us to have our family here because he knew you would want us to. Just as you raised your family here, I want to do the same. You may stay here as long as you like. But, you cannot do this to us anymore. I am sorry for your passing and for your pain, but you cannot take it out on us. My wife is pregnant, and you are causing her loads of stress. You even went after my son. This will stop, or I will seek out someone who will make it stop. Thank you, good night." After this, nothing bad happened to my family again. There were no lights, knocks, or foxes. But, and this is the craziest thing ever, there was one final thing. In a wooden cabinet that my mom bought at a neighborhood garage sale a few days after they moved into the house, there was a card. An anniversary card. It said, "Happy anniversary _and_. Fox." This was found 2 days after my parents' anniversary in June, after they moved the cabinet to the other side of the room. They had owned the cabinet since they moved into the house and had not seen the old man since they bought the house either. My parents have moved many times over the years and lost the card inevitably. We still have the cabinet. It sits in our cabin to this day. The end. I removed my parents' names because you are on Reddit and I don't trust all of you. I forgot something from part 4. My brother was in the middle of the room, put to bed on the floor. Well, after all the dust had settled, my parents started renovating. They wanted to put carpet in my brother's room, so they tore up the tile/fake flooring stuff, and to quote my dad, "Right where your brother was laying on the fox night, there was a blood stain." Mrs. Fox had died in the house, in my brother's room. She was very ill, but fell while trying to replace a light in the room. My wife and I stayed at a nice hotel in downtown Pittsburgh. It was where I asked her to marry me after a lavish meal. I picked the room because it came with a huge Japanese soaking tub that me, a 6 feet 1 inch man, could barely see over the edge of. Anyway, the first night we stayed there, we were sleeping in the single king bed. I believe the alarm clock said it was 2 or 3 a.m. To my left, and just a few feet from me, I heard the sound of what seemed like a pencil slowly rolling down a sloped surface. It was so deliberate and loud that it woke us both up. It was also so deliberate that, while my heart thumped in my chest from the sudden noise, I quickly convinced myself that it was a pencil sliding off the desk in our room and I went back to sleep. The next morning, to my surprise, I found that A, there were no pencils in the room and B, there was no desk. It was my first night in the room, so I assumed that it, like other hotels, had a place to sit and write. Well, that was not the case. The only thing I could find to write with were ballpoint pens with their caps on. They wouldn't make that distinctive, loud noise that a ridged, wooden pencil makes as it rolls. Furthermore, there was no sloped surface in the room for anything to suddenly roll off of in the middle of the night, morning. The whole thing was weird enough for us to talk about it that morning. I do not believe in ghosts, but to be honest, I'd love to encounter something unexplained. I entertained the idea of a ghost pencil, but knew in my head it had an explanation grounded in reality. But that's not all that happened. That night we were both in the soaking tub. The water was up to my chin. It was great. We were in the middle of February, a cold and miserable month in Pittsburgh. We were slushing around in the tub having a blast, pretending we were rich, and then, from the other room, we heard the buzzing of an old microphone hooked up to a PA system. Basically, that sound of feedback that precedes an announcement. The whole room filled with the buzzing sound of microphone feedback. Our hearts thumped in our chests yet again. And then we both practically jumped out of our own skins. We heard the distinctive sound of someone blowing into a microphone to test it. Whooth whooth. You could see it in your head, it was so distinctive, just like the pencil. My heart went from thumping wildly to thrumming like a hummingbird's. I leapt from the tub and threw a towel around myself. "That was a man blowing into a microphone," I said. My wife stayed in the tub, scared and quiet. I searched our room and did not find a speaker, or any kind of speaker grill embedded into a wall or the ceiling. We could not for the life of us find a potential source for the sound other than an iHome speaker that was already playing music from my iPhone, so that was our story. We still had one more night. We were exhilarated by our engagement and the ghosts that haunted the hotel. A week later I had the thought to email the hotel. I asked them about their building. Pittsburgh is an old town. And downtown Pittsburgh is a very, very old town. They got back to me and explained, as my jaw dropped, that they used to be an old telephone factory. I don't know why I found meaning in that explanation or why it made everything click so well. But my thoughts immediately went to the sounds of a factory, the PA system, the drafting table. All relics from another time in that building's life. I found and fostered a cat. She was beautiful. Snowshoe blue-pointed Siamese. Basically my dream cat. And so cute. Big round eyes and little round face. I named her Penelope, Pep for short. Sadly the stress of a new kitty was too much for my older cat, so I gave Pep to a friend. Couldn't stand to never see her again. But at that point, I'd had her 3 months. But it just wouldn't work. She was so smart. Her favorite trick was high five because she always got a treat. She high-fived all the time wanting treats. So Pep lives with my friend Lisa. Pep had been skinny as hell when I found her, but she was getting healthier. One day I get a text from Lisa. "I'm just gonna pretend you didn't know about this. 4 kittens, 2 gray girls, a black boy, and a blue tux boy that looked exactly like her in a different color. I had to keep him. I didn't know if my older cat would accept him, but I was going to try. I named him Pepin and he came home at 7 weeks old. All was well, he was exactly like his mother. When I brought him home, he went right for what her favorite toy had been when she had lived with me. He did everything she had done. He slept in her screwy positions, he laid in the cat tree with a paw hanging over like he was driving a 2-seater, all just like her. He walked like her, sounded like her, he had her face and her bone structure. If I had ever known what she would do in a situation, I knew what he would do, and I have never to this day been wrong." Pep snuck out a window 3 months later and was killed by a car. Devastated doesn't come close. The next morning, Pepin hops up on my bed and sits there. Waits until I pay attention to him. Then very, very deliberately, like Pep always did, gave me a high five. I never taught him that. He never saw Pep do it, she would only do it for me, not Lisa. There was no way he could have learned it, but yet, there was, the morning after she died. I made it. I'm okay. I'm right here. I'm not religious and occasionally spiritual. But I have a feeling, somehow, that that's her. Like she knew she didn't have long and repackaged herself. At first I thought I was seeing it because I wanted to. Of course there's a resemblance between mother and offspring. Of course there's similarities. But everything? And he looks exactly like her. If they were the same color they would be indistinguishable. And how did he learn to high-five? Considering he's never done it since, and had never done it before. I can't even teach him. He knows other tricks. He can sit, stand up, fetch, roll over. But he won't learn high-five. To this day I don't know if I was dreaming or not, but I clearly heard someone gently knocking on my bedroom door in the middle of the night. I live alone. In high school my friends and I were messing around with a Ouija board one night. We had done it before and nothing remarkable had ever happened. We usually did it to try and scare each other or our girlfriends. We all thought it was a joke. That night there was no one else home except the 7 of us and we were all together around the board. One of the girls there wanted to try it. She had never done it before. This time was different. The board misspelled some of the words the same way every time. It gave answers that seemed really historically accurate for our town, things we neither knew or cared about. Long story short, the spirit claimed it was a 10-year-old boy who had died on the property in the 1800s and was buried there too in an unmarked grave. My friend's house was on a farm in the edge of town. We were all a little freaked out because the board had never been so detailed and consistent. However, we were still skeptical and we were all assuming one of us was trying to scare the rest. Finally, my friend asked if the spirit could do something to prove he was there with us. It went to yes and then spelled out KNOCK. Then the planchette stopped moving. We just all stared at it silently and then there was a rap on the window right next to us. The lights were on outside and there was absolutely no one out there. We never touched that effing board again. So I'm 17 and I was working at my great-grand's house. She's really old, and is called Constance. Hasn't walked in years, just turned 100 years old and spends all day lying in bed. I often go visit her, in this old school house that she has lived in for around 60 years. It's got an amazing view of the river. From her bedroom you get one of the best views in the whole town. Not that she can see any of it, because she's almost completely blind. She always has these stories about how all the children from the school would play out in her front garden. She's also told me that men had been in her house at night, and tortured her, but that's unrelated. Anyways, I'm visiting her one morning and I ask if there's any jobs needing done around her house. She tells me that I should check the garden and do some tidying up around there. So I go out the house, and inspect. Now next to her porch, where everyone goes in, is a really narrow pathway. It's just between the house and this embankment, so I look down it. It appears to be a little path leading to nowhere, and notice there's loads of leaves needing cleared. Above the path is just branches and greenery. So I go inside, get a rake, put on gloves and head in. It's only 10 meters but as I'm going down I notice the path seems to veer behind the house. I follow it round, into this incredibly strange 5 by 5 foot-ish open space. There appears to be no other way to get to this 5 by 5 square, but I notice there's this door. It's built into the side of the wall, not her house. It's covered in bracken, Scottish word for ferns, and so I pull some of it back. It appears the door has something written on it. So I clear everything out the way and move back to inspect. There's clearly games room printed into it. Now that made sense to me, because it was a school, right? But then I notice this door has a padlock on it. The padlock seems sturdy, even though the metal it's attached to looks ancient. I try it and it won't budge, but notice there's a little hole in the door. I put my iPhone torch on to try see in, but it's got what appears to be another layer of wood behind it, so I head back. I go up to the room, and asked her about this little room in the back. I show her the photo, that I still have, and she doesn't recognize it. Probably because she's practically blind. All she says is no, the games room was down under the stairs by the door. There was 2 rooms out back, but they were just storage. I don't remember there ever being a games room out back, so I ask her where these rooms were. She tells me they're up on the embankment, also built into the wall. So I go back out. I climb up, using the side of the house and the wall of the embankment, like some shit out of Spider-Man, and manage to find these 2 wood cellar door type things. So I go over and notice that the locks are incredibly rusty. I could literally just pull them off. So I do. Now my gran was right. It was just an old storage room. I open it up, and it's empty. Some old fabric type material on the ground, that appears to be all. So I ask my grandparents, Constance's daughter. She does not know anything about these rooms, despite growing up in the house, and literally just told me. I ask her to come up and take a look, so she does. We go through the same process, only much longer to climb up, and when we arrive at the doors built into the wall, her only remark was, "Oh, peculiar, best go and see grandma because we will need to bring you home soon." Still spooks me out thinking about how this tiny little bolted room north the wall is so detached from society. My great-grand didn't remember it existing, and my gran appeared to have no interest. Nobody would see this from anywhere else. This little 5x5 patio thing is there. On the other side of the wall is just a big hill which I assume the room was built into. Above it is completely covered in branches and leaves. When my daughter was 7, she kept asking me why I was smoking in her room late at night. I was a smoker at the time, but I never smoked in her room. I never smoked upstairs at all. I told her that I sure wasn't smoking in her room late at night or at any time, but she was insistent that someone was coming in, sitting on her bed and smoking. I was kind of freaked out, but I knew nobody was sneaking into her house just to catch a late night smoke in my daughter's bedroom. The house had belonged to the in-laws of my daughter's teacher at the time, so her teacher asked her how she liked the new house and her new room, and of course, my kid says it's great, but someone smokes in my room at night and mom swears it not her. So, on parent conference night, the teacher pulls me aside and asks which bedroom our daughter sleeps in. I tell her and she says, "I don't know what you believe and I don't want to offend you, but kid says someone is sitting on her bed and she smells cigarette smoke late at night." I'm getting ready for a deserved lecture on smoking around children, which I did not get. The teacher went on to tell me that her mother-in-law wasn't allowed to smoke due to health issues and that she would sneak into what was now my daughter's room at night for a few quick drags. My daughter's bed was in the middle of her favorite clandestine smoking spot. We actually lived in harmony with Hazel the ghost for quite some time. She had an annoying habit of putting things back where she thought they belonged, but otherwise, she was a fine ghost. She had said in life that she had no intentions of leaving her house even after death. I did end up having a chat with her about her chosen smoking spot though, and that stopped pretty quickly. Okay, so this was probably 15-ish years ago now. When I was in high school, my group of friends used to spend a lot of time at a particular friend's house because it was huge. It was also quite an old house, but his parents were cool with us basically taking over when we were there. We'd make dinner for about 10 people. Stay up late listening to music and playing video games and they never minded. Anyway, one evening we're all sitting in his room, watching TV. It's dark and the lights are on but the curtains are open. Suddenly 2 different people on opposite sides of the room jump like they've been startled and look around. Both of them explain they saw in the reflection in the window, on the 2nd floor, just FYI, somebody walk across the room. None of us had moved. It freaked a few of the girls out and we had to calm them down a bit. Flash to a couple of weeks later, and we found a pack of cards in our friend's house that had letters on them. Somebody suggested we could use these as a Ouija board and figure out if our friend's house was actually haunted. We got a big wooden board, I think it might have been the top of a table once upon a time, arranged the cards in a circle around the edge with an extra 2 homemade yes/no cards, got a glass and off we went. It started to answer questions, telling us it was a man who used to live in the house and who died there. We asked when he died and just got the answer long. We asked if he was moving the glass, and he said yes. This is where I decided to be dumb, and I asked if he could move anything else other than the glass. Yes. We all paused and listened for the sound of something moving, but nothing happened. We asked if he had moved something. Yes. Nothing happened again, so we moved on and asked some more questions. This was at 10:30 p.m. After a while longer we said goodbye. I think at least one of us was aware enough about Ouija board lore to know we had to close the conversation properly, and then a little later we all went home, a little spooked but enjoying it nevertheless. I walked home with another friend who lived nearby. As I walked in my front door, my mom called through to me to be careful in my room because a mirror had fallen off the wall earlier and they weren't sure if they'd picked up all the bits of glass. When I asked when this had happened, she told me about 10:30. The same time I asked the spirit to move something. I did not sleep well that night. I personally have quite a few spooky stories, but my mom has a good one, so I will tell hers. When she was younger, her and a group of friends were driving down a desolate road at night and there was a house that they passed that had a window lit up upstairs, so they slowed down to look and she said there was a lantern in the window and a man and a woman sat facing each other. She then said that a second man wearing a top hat came into view, walked up behind the woman and started strangling her. At this point my mom and her friends freaked out and drove off. When they went back to see what had happened, they drove up to where they had seen it happen, and it wasn't even a window they had seen, it was a plastic sheet, so they didn't know what to make of it, but they all ended up agreeing they had seen a ghost. I'm from Scotland, and when I was a child, my mum and dad took my sister and I on a trip to Fort William, which is a town up in the Highlands. People go there for skiing and hiking. It wasn't winter, so we were there to do some easy hiking. My sister and I were quite young, I was about 11. And to stay for a couple of nights. I can't remember the name of the hotel we stayed at, but I do remember that it was old-fashioned, and we were all in one room together. There was a single bed, where I was sleeping, a double bed in the middle, my parents were there, and another single on the other side, my sister's. I was often frightened when I was a girl. I didn't like the dark, and I was super scared of the possibility of ghosts, etc. I never found it easy to sleep because of this, even at home. I vividly remember tossing and turning that first night in the hotel for a long time, before lying on my back and trying to calm myself down. I then felt the bed sink a little next to my feet. I heard the creak of the old mattress. Someone was sitting at the foot of my bed. My heart was honestly pounding. I hadn't heard my sister or parents get up, so I was terrified. Whatever was sitting there quickly moved, so it was sitting on my feet. I felt the weight of whatever it was. I heard the mattress creak again. My feet were freezing cold. It then moved off my feet, and settled down next to them again. The old mattress shifted and creaked again. Within a second or two, I felt the coldest I've ever felt, but not throughout my whole body. The coldness was slowly rising up from my feet, accompanied by a feeling of pressure. I was too scared to open my eyes. I was willing myself to call for my mom, but I was so scared that I just couldn't at first. When I managed to shout out and wake the rest of my family, the cold, pressured feeling had reached up to my knees. When the lights were switched on, the feeling vanished. I have no explanation for this whole situation. My dad slept in that bed the next night, and I stayed awake the whole night in the double with my mom. I was visiting my parents while I was in college one summer. I was taking a nap around 11 a.m. on the couch in their living room with the TV on when I was woken up by a doorknob jiggling hard upstairs. Their doors have those knobs that lock by pushing in the knob and turning, no buttons or anything on it. I assumed that my dad had locked himself in a room accidentally, as he had done it before, to great comedic effect and frustration on his part. So I go upstairs, and all the doors are wide open. At this point I was a little weirded out, but I decided I was having some weird half-awake imaginary sound thing going on. I go back downstairs and turn the TV off and fall back asleep. About an hour later I'm woken up again by the sound of a doorknob jiggling, except it was on the other side of the house upstairs from the last one. I go up again and all the doors are still wide open. I called my parents at work. They ran an automobile service station at the time, and asked if either of them had been home at all that day, and both said that they were at work all day. Needless to say, I got out of there. It hasn't happened since, and that was about 6 years ago. Also related, a friend and I were helping my parents move into that house, and moving a bunch of stuff into a room above the attached garage. It was a small room that could be a bedroom / study / etc., but because the AC and heat didn't work very well in there, they decided to use it as storage. There was a small closet attached to the room, and when my friend and I were moving things into there, we noticed that there was a bookcase sitting in there with a note saying that we could keep it. That's when we noticed that there was the top of a doorway behind the bookcase. Again, super creeped out. Eventually we got around to checking that door out, and it just led to the attic and nothing was in there, but at the time it was super creepy and weird. I live in an area that has a lot of native history and originally typed it up after another member in the group posted his experiences as a security guard in the same living complex. I never had paranormal experiences until living in this apartment. My dad bought a condo on the ground floor of a large 2-tower condo complex in the mid-2000s and did an absolutely beautiful renovation. After his divorce, he rented it out for several years. He had bad luck over and over with tenants would not stay more than a couple months and repeatedly did not pay rent. In fall of 2008 I moved in and rented the second bedroom to a young woman, visiting my dad when he and my stepmom still lived there. I never spent enough time to really notice anything, nor was my brain attuned to the paranormal. Even after the renovation, the condo had a dark, creepy vibe which I never thought much of and attributed to being on the ground floor with lots of trees and a stream outside. For exactly a year from fall 2008-09, I didn't experience much. I later asked the roommate who lived there, about 3 months, if she had any experiences, and she said she always felt that she was being watched, particularly from the stream. There were 3 seemingly insignificant things that happened during this year that made me for a moment wonder if the apartment was haunted, but I never put much thought into it at the time. The first was the fan. I lived in the master bedroom with a small office area attached where I kept the cat litter box. There was a ceiling fan in there with a wall switch that let you select off/low/med/high. Every time I would turn it off, it would go on high. Or I'd turn it on medium and it would go off. Easy to chalk up to faulty electrical wiring, so I never put much thought into it. The second incident during that time was a little more frightening, but brush-offable. I was in a long-distance relationship at the time. One night as I was falling asleep, in that zone between wakefulness and dreamland, I heard my name called from a very specific spot on the ceiling in a disembodied version of my boyfriend's exact voice. Jerked me awake saying WTF, but I didn't lose too much sleep. The third odd thing that happened in the apartment can easily be explained as a plumbing disaster. For that year I pretty much only used the green bathroom in the hallway. The master bath creeped me out. I came home one day to bad flooding from the toilet that was restricted to only the bathroom. The insurance guys came, ripped up all the wood flooring from the main door to all of the master bedroom, somehow leaving the bathroom tile intact, determined there was absolutely no way the plumbing could have malfunctioned, and refused to replace anything, leaving a $10,000 job to my dad out of pocket after destroying the house. This has always been a bit of a head-scratcher and just added to the oddness and weirdness of this place. My dad never replaced the flooring and I walked on concrete the rest of my time there. After the flooding, for the rest of my time there, the green bathroom was really humid and warm, musty smelling. This will be important later. I still use that bathroom but not as much. Fast forward a year. Long-distance guy and I break up. Life goes on during this time. No more incidents that I can recall in the apartment. One important person to this story was a security guard. I'll call her Pam. She knew us from growing up there and was always friendly when I drove in and out. In fall of 2009 I was dating a new guy named Matt who had just moved from California, a nice, good, positive dude. I'm not super woo-woo, but I think most of us can agree that everything in life is some sort of energy, and spirit/paranormal is the best example of that. Adding or subtracting people, energies, or drastically changing an environment such as renovating can throw off the balance of energy. When Matt moved in is when SHT started getting weird, October of 2009. I remember this night like it happened yesterday. I borrowed my dad's car for the night and needed to register it with security. Pam was working. She was making small talk as she was filling out the form, not looking at me, and casually asked, "Did you get your place cleansed yet?" Gut punch to my stomach. Everything flooded into my head at once and I knew. I started shaking and asked, "What do you mean?" She looked up at me and said, "When you moved in I told you to get that place cleansed." I said, "I probably thought you said cleaned." "No," she said, "cleansed." Spiritually. I flipped the F out. I burst into tears. Everything I knew deep down and never acknowledged about this apartment was true. I refused to go back into the apartment that night and asked Matt to get me overnight stuff to stay at my mom's. It turned out that Pam was Wiccan and offered to do a full cleansing of the apartment the next night. So the next night rolls around. Pam, me, armed with bags of sage, Matt, and 2 new people, Tiffany, a girl who had lived in the same apartment growing up. Apparently my dad bought it when her dad sold it, and was now into semi-professional ghost hunting due to her experiences in that apartment growing up. WTF, and her girlfriend, Tina, had an EMF device that registers supernatural activity and a recording device, which we placed on the coffee table in the enclosed patio. Pam led us through the house. We repeated what she said, asking any negative spirits to leave, etc. Nothing odd happened. They left, and Matt and I went to bed. Good to go. Right? A few days later Pam called me. Tiffany caught something on the recording. I met Tiffany in the lobby. She now lived in the other tower in the complex, in a different, less haunted apartment. She played the recorder from the night of the cleansing. You can hear Pam chanting/leading us starting from the kitchen and us repeating. As we slowly walked through the enclosed patio and past the coffee table with the recorder on it, a woman's voice screams directly into the recorder, "Get out." From here on out is where my timeline starts to shuffle, because it's not really relevant, nor do I remember in what order everything happened unless otherwise noted. Stuff happened on a daily basis. I wish I'd written it all down at the time, but I didn't. We did 8 or 10 cleansings over the year with little change. This is all what I remember off my head. There was a period of about 3 to 4 months where things got so bad that I took my cat and moved to my mom's house. She'd already heard the recordings that I'd borrowed from Tiffany and let me stay. During this time, Tiffany and I set up the recorder on the counter over the washer/dryer to see if we could catch anything while I was away. We did. It's important to note here that I was the only person who had a key. Neither the resident manager or even my dad had a key. I remember this specifically because I had to call a locksmith one day when I locked myself out. Anyway, the recording. A ghost family was living in the house. Sounded like they were possibly from the 40s/50s era. We caught about 8 distinct voices on the recording, a woman who liked to sing, a woman with yippee chihuahua-like dogs, no dogs near me in the apartments, a woman who was chronically coughing, tuberculosis, a little boy who ran up and down the hallway, a man speaking in the local dialect and doing laundry, people cooking, talking about mundane life stuff. The coughing lady would repeatedly speak directly into the recorder, softly saying "Help me, help me." This went on for weeks. First, I'd like to preface this story by saying that I consider myself a pretty rational person. I understand intrinsically that there has to be some explanation for it, but I don't know what it is. Okay, when I was 11 I went to a summer camp type place with my classroom for 4 days. I don't remember the name, but I do remember that every one of the kids had immediate weird vibes when we got there. Lots of kids waking up crying wanting to go home, meltdowns, general not fun when it should have been fun. Kids wandering off into the woods. Camp counselors miserable. One night I woke up to the sound of tapping on the window. At first I thought it was just a branch or something, but the tapping followed a rhythm. It went tap 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 tap. Once I figured out that it wasn't random I got more scared than I've ever been in my life. Were we being pranked by another cabin? I ran into the nook our counselor slept in and started to wake him up. The clock next to him was deep into early morning, maybe 3 a.m. He woke up and got mad at me, telling me to go back to bed. I understood that it wasn't a prank at that point. I went and laid in my bed. Soon after it started again. Eventually it stopped. I was terrified and didn't go back to sleep. The next day SHT was weird. It's normal for kids to be scared, but I was caught on some questioning my own morality type shit. I refused to go canoeing cause I was convinced we would die. If I was near the woods I was overcome with a desire to walk deep into them, and that terrified me more. This wasn't normal little kid scared shit, this was a deep existential acceptance of the possibility of my own death, and I feel like 11 is kinda young for that, but maybe not. The whole trip I couldn't hang. Even on the school bus back I was convinced something would happen to the bus. I didn't feel normal for weeks. Everyone I talked to about it denied it. They were sleeping, the other cabins had no clue. There was no pranking going on to corroborate the possibility of that being it. It had to be something rational, but for the life of me I don't know what it is. The space next to the window was free of branches. Maybe it was a deer? Who knows? If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.